Hey everyone, thank you for joining our fourth session of the Modern Change Management Launch and Learn. Today we're going to be covering change automation with DevOps. We have a new speaker here today, Joe Offenberg. I'll intro him in a second to give us some context and walk over a pretty cool demo. Let's jump in. Okay, as always, we have our safe harbor. So there may be some forward-looking statements in this presentation. They're based on our best understanding at this point in time. So just don't take anything as set in stone, as it could change. Okay, so now let's get into our topic for today. I want to start by bringing us back to the adoption journey and kind of where we've been and where we're going today. So we started this series off, talking about how we replace our legacy workflows with Flow, how to reduce our technical debt, and how we can start, defining change models. We then moved into governance and really how to make sure governance is right for the context that we're using it. So how to adopt approval policies to automate some of these governance decisions. And then we continue down the automation path, really looking at the data and how we can use data to drive this automation and the various ways we can assess risk. Ultimately, we were looking to take the subjectivity out of the change process, where it's appropriate, and really driving traceability and velocity in the change process. So today, we're gonna kind of really go through this bottom row and give one example of, of this maturity journey using DevOps. So how you can connect with your CI/CD tools, how to automatically create changes for pipeline executions for application code changes, and then ultimately how to get to full change automation. So with all this, as we mature the change process, we're looking to improve velocity, volume, stability, and compliance.
We started down this process, I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, and customers were coming to ServiceNow and saying, hey, we have a problem with change management, right? We have teams or development teams are becoming more autonomous, and the development process is moving closer to the business and away from IT. And what started happening is we started losing some control and visibility into what changes were being made in production, right? So they adopted methodologies like DevOps, where under continuous delivery, for example, you're making small and incremental changes continuously to production. And we needed to be able to capture those changes in an automated way. So this is a perfect example of why change models became important as a way of simplifying the change process for a lot of these development teams and enable them to move fast, move their code into production quickly, but still allow us to put compliance around it, put controls around it, make sure that they follow all the necessary best practices, they run their security scans, all the testing results look good, and so on. So this had a lot of benefits for them as well as for the IT organization. They spent a lot less time on administrative processes like opening a change request and providing data for audits. And we were able to ensure compliance in a much more rapid and efficient way. So what this means is there are a lot of benefits for a lot of different personas here. So the developers themselves, obviously, if they're not spending time on opening the change records, they get that time back. They get to spend that time on what they're supposed to be doing, which is enhancing the application and fixing bugs and so on. Once you attach change management to DevOps pipelines, right, you're going to get a lot more changes. And in order to handle a large amount of changes, we have to be able to automate approvals. So we provide that capability as well. And you'll see that in the demonstration. Again, another capability of our modern change solution, our modern change narrative here. And then, of course, the auditors are very happy because the change records themselves are more comprehensive. There's a lot more data, and the data is more accurate. Often in the past, developers would simply check a box that they did the security scan or check a box saying that they ran certain activities, more of an attestation, right? But in this case, we're getting data directly from the DevOps tools, and we're able to automatically approve those changes based on those data points we get. And the audit the auditors are happy with those change records. You know, a lot more of them, but they're very comprehensive and they capture. Now, this benefits the operations folks as well. Change management has always been a great benefit to incident management, going back to the early days of ITIL. You want to know what changed when an incident came in. However, the changes become more and more complex and maybe more actual things are changing in a change record. In DevOps, we're making smaller changes, right? And more incremental changes. So imagine these changes on a timeline right before an incident happens or an alert comes in. We can see very specifically which change happened right before the alert. And in that change, it might only be a couple of lines of code in an application that changed. We can tell you which file was changed in the Git repository, for example, and how that might have impacted the application and so on. So operations benefits. And then, of course, all the data we're collecting to make all of this work, we can provide analytics, right? We can provide some dashboards, some industry standard metrics. Some folks might know the DORA metrics, right? These are metrics that came out of research at Google, actually, and they started a project called DevOps Research and Analytics, DORA, and these are the DORA metrics, and we provide those on our dashboard. Another set of industry standard metrics are the flow metrics. So these are really valuable for all the stakeholders, not only in the IT organization, but also on the CTO side of the organization, the application owners, the product owners, and so on. They want to see how well the adoption of DevOps is going and what benefits they're getting from this adoption, right? And that becomes clear. So just to sum up the solution, we connect DevOps tools to bring that data into the platform. Modern Change could then take advantage of that data to create the change record with all the necessary data, look at a list of criteria, and then decide, hey, can we auto approve that, right? And then, of course, having those metrics there to be able to measure performance, including the DORA metrics, okay? So where does this fit in? If you've watched our previous series on Modern Change, so we are right smack in the middle of the federated change model. And I would say we are probably one of the most mature examples when we look at the maturity model for modern change. The DevOps change, change acceleration, change velocity, I should say, is basically the most mature and most valuable way to implement change models and change auto approval processes and take advantage of things like change success scores and so on. All of that can fit into, and you see all the checkbox we get here under the federated change models for DevOps, okay? So the key components of this, again, model states. So if you're familiar with the change models, this allows us to simplify the change process and make it fit to purpose. So make a very specific DevOps change model with certain phases and certain transitions. And a state-based flow between those changes with conditions required to move from, let's say, a scheduled state to an implement state, right? What are some of the transitions? For example, if it's in conflict, for one reason or another, we don't want to move into the implement state until that conflict is resolved. I'll show you how that works in the demonstration. The integrations we provide, the necessary data to feed into these approval policies come from the DevOps tools, right? We need to know all the tests passing, all the security scans, are they successful? We need to know all the information about who made the change, what was the change for. We get that from tools like Git and Jira, for example, and then that's how we provide this outcome. And then, so this is probably the best example you'll find of why the change models can really help to improve the change management process. Other examples might include provisioning in the cloud. So, you go to a service catalog, you request something to maybe reconfigure a running instance in the cloud. That's also a very good example of modern change. It's automated. All the data is available from all the tools, and we could apply policies to those changes, right? And this is just, several ways where the modern change process is assisting, okay? So at this point, I'm going to switch over to the demo environment. And I guess first, I just want to see if there are any questions. I see Margarita still has her hand up, but I think she might be stuck with her hand up. Is there anybody else a question there? No?
We just
Okay. Any questions, you could just throw it in the chat
Hey,
and we can get to it there.
Joe, there is a question from Coleman. You might want to take live. And
From
yeah.
Coleman.
yeah.
DJ, do you want to come off mute and ask?
Not really, but I can repeat it. So what you're demoing here, does this assume that the teams entering DevOps are capturing, testing, approvals, all those things that they normally would do? Does this assume all that's being done and they're just kind of providing that into the DevOps module?
Well, for the most part, yes. So what this
Okay.
assumes is, as part of their pipelines, they're building their application, they're testing their application, and then they're putting their application into production. Those could be, different pipelines, right? One pipeline builds, another pipeline does the testing, and then you might have
Yeah.
a deployment pipeline like a week later. Yeah.
The only reason I asked is because I've been attending all of these and it's all good stuff, but all of it assumes that they're doing all these kind of agile release management activities before they get to change. So I just want to make sure that I've got that squarely in my head, because in the real world, a lot of companies, that doesn't work that way. So that's why I want to understand the approach that was used to design this. So
Yeah,
that answers my
we're
question. Thank you.
solving the problem for the customers that do work that way, and they've come to the ITSM folks and say, hey, change management is the bottleneck. It's slowing down the process, right? If you have teams that aren't that agile, if they're not using automated pipelines, then maybe a manual change, at least for them, is acceptable. It works because it's not slowing them down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure I understood the architectural design approach that was being taken for entry here. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, thank you, DJ. Appreciate the question. Okay, so I'm going to start in our DevOps change workspace here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of the tools that I have connected, because I'm going to run through an example, basically the day in the life of a developer. Developers, the goal here is to keep developers in their own tools, right? We don't want developers to have to log into ServiceNow to create the change record or to check the status of the change record. All that information should be provided to them in their tools. And if everything's working the way it's supposed to, they won't ever have to log into ServiceNow for this process. It's going to collect the data we need. It's going to decide whether it's okay to move to production. And it's done in a very passive way without engaging a lot of effort on their part. And that's the goal, right? Because we know that this process is only going to get faster. And it's because these companies are competing now with software applications. It's all revenue generating applications that, whether you're manufacturing tractors like Caterpillar, or you're a financial company and you're trying to create new capabilities in your phone app and so on, you have to be able to do better than your competition. And that's why this is so important, right? So if we look at, let's say, the world of a developer, they might have a planning tool like Jira, right? And, I know a lot of you are thinking, hey, ServiceNow has a very nice planning tool, our SPM solution, but I'm showing it with Jira because, they do own a big chunk of the market and most of our customers use Jira. So we use work items in Jira on the Kanban board. This is interesting information because it tells us, why are they making the changes, right? So you see the work items in various stages, but we support Jira. Of course, we support our own SPM solution. We also support ADO boards, and they have a similar work item Kanban board, for example. GitHub issues is another one where developers track all the work they're doing. And this is important information. We bring this into the platform. Then a developer will take something that they're working on, let's say a bug fix. The report's not working here. They'll go into GitHub and make a change in the application code. In this case, I'll go ahead and I'll update one of these files here, and I'll commit that change. And as a best practice, we expect the developers to go ahead and link that change back to a work item. Now, if they don't do it, we can make sure they do, right? That's one of the data points we're going to check. Are they following best practices? Are they linking their commits to their work items? That will be one of the line items in our policies, okay? And then, of course, we have a pipeline tool. In this case, I'm looking at Jenkins. I'll go ahead and run another job here, and that'll kick off a new job. And what you'll see is in this pipeline, And this is typically the way these DevOps tools work. They'll build the application, they'll build an artifact, they'll test the artifact, and then they'll do some more testing in a UAT environment, for example, and then at some point they'll deploy it to production. Now, this usually doesn't always happen in one pipeline. Usually there are several pipelines, but either way, we support basically linking the data to the artifacts that are built, and then getting the data from when they test the artifacts, right? So the artifact becomes the key that ties all the data together. And then when we deploy that artifact or several artifacts, we have that information to apply to a change record. Now, if everything goes smooth, and let me show you some of the previous ones, like this one, I could see it ran in 4 minutes, right? That tells me right away, I know that was done with an automatic approval. So just before it went to production, it opened a change record, and you can see we say, here's the change request number. And within 2 minutes or so, we have auto approved it based on the policies. So we've gathered up all the data and we said, you've met all the conditions. And this particular pipeline ran all the way through to production in a matter of minutes, okay? Often that's not the case, but the goal is to do this probably 75, 80% of the time. So now let's switch over to ServiceNow and let me show you what's happening when these pipelines are running, okay? I'm going to drill into that particular pipeline here. And this is the pipeline from the ServiceNow perspective. What you'll see is we discover all of the pipelines and the executions. We discover all the Git repositories. So you connect the tools and we can discover all these resources. Once we've discovered it, then there's some onboarding steps. For example, when you have a certain step where you want to open a change record, you have to specify some details, like the change model. We want to make sure that this particular step is going to use a change model to create the change record for a DevOps change. You might want to use templates. You might want to have different application groups assigned and so on. And you could add other fields as well by modifying the pipeline itself and adding those to the directive in the pipeline. Okay, so then from here, let me go back. I can show you from this pipeline the visualization we provide, right? So on the ServiceNow side, we've never had visibility into these pipelines. So here you can see the building of an artifacts, the testing of artifacts. Here we have the commit messages and so on. We have the software quality scan. So this is using a tool called Sonar Cube. So this is all really rich and interesting data. And here's even the security scan, right? In this case, it's Veracode. All of this data makes its way into that change record, okay? So what that means is we can use the data in the change record, well, very simply to understand who's making the change, what change are they making, what files are they touching. Very important, the security summaries are attached, right? So I could drill into, for example, the Veracode scan. I could see, okay, there are some medium level vulnerabilities. So if I was manually approving this change, I would have all the data I needed, right? I don't have to go back and tell the developers to attach files to the change record, right? All of that data is here. The versions and so on, all of that is attached. In the case of the one I just made, again, all of that gets attached to the change. We have a new change record here. Let me go back to our, open up another application. This is the Globex one here. Look at this pipeline and view that pipeline. So this is the one that I just kicked off a few minutes ago. And I can see this one looks like it was rejected. I'm going to find this specific change. Okay, this is not the right one. Let me go back to that pipeline. Website right in, pipelines. I might have clicked on the wrong one. I guess this is the one I want. Okay, this is not the right pipeline. Let me just show you the change record. And this change record is basically created automatically, right? And what you can see is all the data that we collect. There's the commit that I made a few minutes ago. There's the work item. So this is telling us why we're making the change. This is telling us what's being changed, who's making the change, and so on. The test results are all listed here for this, and the software quality scan. All of that data is in the change. And then what we could do is we can apply change policies. So I'm going to switch over to our service operations workspace here, and I can show you what that looks like from that angle. Yeah, so if, for example, here's the let me bring up this change again. So here's the view from the service operations workspace. All the same details are here. I could also see that this particular change is in a conflict, and from here we can see, okay, what's happening, why is it in a conflict, right? So even if we automatically approve this change, there are other things to be considered. Is there a blackout window? Is there a maintenance window? If there's a maintenance window, we'll actually wait for that maintenance window to occur. And again, as part of the change model, we can decide based on the data we have, is that enough to transition from the schedule phase to the implement phase? And in this case, we decided, no, we won't go to the implement phase until we get to that maintenance window. Again, this is all automated. You don't have to log back in and check. We also see there are other changes happening at the same time, impacting the same CIs and so on. This makes its way into the decision, whether to auto approve or not. The other thing we could do is look at risk, right? So you might have some risk information here. We're going to have, let's see. Yeah, so basically what we're doing is we're taking these data points and we are assessing them from a development point of view. Did developers follow best practices? From an operational point of view, are there any active incidents or outages, right? We know that based on the configuration item. We could look in the CMDB and get that data. And then, of course, security, we want to make sure all the security scans look good. And those results can now be figured into a change approval process. So you see here we have a change policy, right? Again, all part of the the modern change solution, where we can now take all of these data points. You see they're all input variables now as they're represented, and then decide on, can we approve this change in an automated way? If it's high risk, we can reject the change, right? That's the answer. Let's reject the change. If all the policies are met, then we could approve those changes. And then so you have all of these data points where you can put thresholds on. If it falls within, if there are no outages, for example, or no open incidents, no security vulnerabilities, the software quality results, we have all of that. We have other details related to the software quality results you can drill into, and so on. All that data becomes available that you can use in a decision table to automatically approve that change. And if all the policies are met, then that change will go to production. So for example, in this pipeline here, here we opened the change. Let me go back to the previous one here. This change was automatically approved, and it was approved by this one was actually manually approved, right? Because we see the approver, the name is here, and we even see the comments they put. Now, this is inside the tool. So when something doesn't reach the point of an auto approval, it got escalated for a manual approval. And then from the developer standpoint, they can see exactly what's happening. They can see that these steps are taking place in the ServiceNow platform, but they don't have to log into ServiceNow to see it. It's all showing up in the console of their tool. Same thing with Azure DevOps, right? When the pipelines run, we update the pipeline with lots of information. So for example, we can see during the deployment phase of a pipeline, the change record was open. And then at every state change of the change, we provide data into the console in Azure DevOps pipeline. So regardless of what tool you're using, it could be GitHub, it could be ADO, it could be Jenkins, it could be Jira, GitLab. We support all the major DevOps tools. We can capture this information, and it all works the same way. And then in the platform, we normalize that data, right? We bring the data in from all the various tools. We know in many large organizations, there are multiple teams using different tools. However, being able to normalize that data in the platform is very valuable. right? So if we look at the, let's go back to our DevOps change workspace here. And we can see, for example, our insights dashboard. Regardless of what tools you're using or if teams are using different tools, we can see the data across all the different tools, and it's all normalized. So for example, I mentioned the DORA metrics. We have the average lead time. This is basically how long does it take commits to go from the Git repo into production, right? So developers make some change, and then it takes roughly 9 days for those changes to make it into production. This is across all the apps. I say, okay, let's look at it for a specific app. So let's look at the hotel reservation service, right? I could see, okay, for them, it's taken a little bit longer. They're not deploying as frequently, and it takes about 20 days. And also I see the MTTR is very high, to resolve incidents is taking, almost 4 or 5 days there. So we want to be able to bring those numbers down. We could identify which teams could benefit most from this type of automation, right? Using these metrics, okay? The other thing we have here are the flow metrics. Now, flow metrics is a way of measuring developer productivity, not by how many lines of code they write, but how many work items, like enhancement requests, bug fixes, and so on, they can move through the process into production. So this actually goes a step further back before the Git commit, like the DORA metric. We go back to when the work item is created, when the idea is created that this needs to be fixed or this needs to be enhanced. We start the clock there, we get the timestamp there, and that's the average flow time. That's how long it takes these work items to move into production, and so on. So you can see how this is beneficial when trying to understand, how is DevOps impacting our teams and impacting our ability to compete with our competitors with our applications. We also measure acceleration, the accelerate metrics. These are those DORA metrics I mentioned. The change acceleration metrics is really about what impact we're having on the change approval process, the time to close changes, right? Automated versus manual changes. So you can see most of our changes are automated throughout the week here. We see changes waiting approval and so on. So this is a way of showing the teams that haven't yet adopted this solution the benefits they can get from this by automating their changes and moving faster, but still ensuring compliance. Okay, so that's DevOps change velocity solution. I'm going to take a pause here. We covered a lot, and see if there are any questions. I see.
Joe, there's a good question asked on the chat, which was approaches for onboarding at scale. So, when you've got thousands of pipelines, because you stepped through one pipeline there that was a kind of very pointy clicky and a really good way of doing it for a small set of pipelines. When you got 6,000, what's our experience of approaching that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is an adoption journey here, right? And if you just want to connect the tools and get the data, you can do that at scale very quickly. Because that involves just connecting to the tools, discovering the resources, and that will get the data into the platform. That will get the data feeding those insights dashboard. From there, you can move on to change traceability. This is just the ability to create change records with the DevOps data you brought into the platform. This could be done at scale as long as you have access to the tools and you could get the data into the platform. Even the creation of changes in an automated way, this could, for the most part, be done at scale very quickly. You can create templates that the developers can use in their pipelines to create the changes. When it starts getting difficult, and when the scalability of this starts to become difficult, is when is the change approval policies. Okay, that requires collaboration, and it often requires team by team collaboration. I mean, you can set change approval policies that are global across the whole organization, and then layer additional policies on top of that specific to a region or specific to a business unit. And then eventually some teams are going to need some tweaks to that. So the scalability starts to become difficult at the change approval part because it involves collaborating between people, whereas all this is just technology connecting the technology and getting the data in. The other thing we provide are APIs, right? So to help with onboarding, for example, there are APIs that can be used to generate the app records that connect all the resources for an app and so on. So that will help speed things up quite a bit. But yeah, as far as just connecting the tools, getting the data in the platform, that's something you can do very quickly, and within a few weeks you can start seeing the results in the dashboard. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. There's a hand up from Marcus I saw earlier. Oh, there's a few hands up.
You have a couple
Marcus.
hands up.
So are we doing hands up now?
Yeah, we can do some now.
Marcus.
Yo, thanks, Dan. Hi,
Hey.
Joe.
Hi,
Yeah,
Marcus.
I put my hand up when you were going through the risk assessment there, and I saw calculating a low risk, high risk, whatever, which is pretty much entirely based on those policies you've set. So did it meet this policy and this policy and this policy, and therefore it calculates high, low risk, yeah?
Yeah.
Comparing that to an old-fashioned change where you will have some form of manual risk assessment. I think you touched on it yourself, actually, that you'll manually answer some risk questions. Would you recommend that that's switched off for DevOps? Because otherwise, you've got to try and find a way to get those questions answered from the pipeline.
Yeah, so that's basically what you're implementing, right? If you already have change managers that are manually assessing risk by going through a checklist, that's more than half the battle, in my opinion, because when I started doing this, I thought that most of our customers had that already. Because they were approving changes manually, they had a checklist of some kind. What I didn't realize is that a lot of change managers actually use gut instinct, and it's hard to put that into a decision table. But if you already have that detail decided, working backwards from what it takes to approve it and putting that into policies is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. There's also other ways to do it, right? We have success scores for change approval teams that can be utilized. You can use risk calculations and just have one line item in your approval policy, but have a lot of different data feeding into the risk calculations. So these are all capabilities of modern change that you can take advantage of. I showed that example because that's using a decision table based on a list of approval criteria is the way most of our customers are doing it manually today. So adopting an automated way from that is the quickest path forward, but you could get more sophisticated. Does that help answer your question?
Not really, because we haven't found it easy, which is why I'm asking the question. So it's the change owner that answers these questions. We're question about testing. Answer a question about testing, which teases out the quality of your testing and how complex is the implementation, and et cetera, et cetera. So with an old-fashioned change, they're just manually answering those questions.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get the pipeline?
How
do you get the pipeline to answer those questions? Or is it just best to switch them off when it comes to DevOps?
Yeah, I think the big thing about DevOps is the changes are much smaller and more incremental, right? And the other thing about DevOps is if something breaks, you should be able to fix it quickly, because that's the nature of DevOps. So when customers ask about like a rollback policy, most of the time in a DevOps scenario, you roll forward. You don't roll back. You say, oh, we broke something with this new update. Let's fix it quick. Boom. Let's get it out. And again, as long as it goes through all of the policy checks that we have, the security scan, the functional testing, the performance testing, and so on, then it makes it through the pipeline fairly quickly. If there are other impact assessments, let's say, for example, you have a change, and I can bring up one of those changes again that I had before, and you want to understand, for example, what's the impact on this global web service, or it's a configuration item, what other services are impacted by that configuration item. The data is there, right? So you can see the relationships. And then you can use that data as far as understanding, are there any active incidents and recent outages? So when somebody's manually trying to understand assess risk, what steps are they taking to do that manually? And can we do that in an automated way?
So I would add to that, Marcus, as well, just to say that when you have a risk assessment for a normal change, you're trying to cover a lot of bases with that, right? You could be doing a patching change, you could be doing an infra change, you could be doing an infra change across a whole load of systems, and you need to gather some information, and that isn't always obvious from, even if you've got a very good CNDB, it's something that maybe you need to ask a question about. With the DevOps change, you've got a pipeline, and that thing can only deploy to a certain place. And also with that pipeline run, it only deploys in a certain way. Steps will be followed through automation that ensures it's going to run in a certain way as well, and that steps will be followed as that pipeline executes. The tests will happen, and security scans will happen, and they'll be recorded. So you've got a lot of structured data. And even from within the kind of more traditional change route, if you haven't got a pipeline attached, we kind of favor use of structured data. Like, instead of asking whether it affects a critical service, we have a risk condition to say, is a critical service impacted by this? And you can still use risk conditions for DevOps change. The point is, with DevOps change, it kind of makes it makes the risk assessment questionnaire obsolete, both in terms of the nature, as Joe was saying, but in terms of the small incremental nature of the changes. Partly because normally you've got a larger release train on top of it, which is taking care of some of the larger organizational kind of business context questions. And also because as part of what you're doing with DevOps, you have a lot more structured data and you can answer the questions directly. So that's normally the case. But if you have specific questions, Marcus, you know my number. You can have a call and we can talk through the specific questions.
I think that last little comment you said there may have answered my question in terms of the traditional risk assessment questionnaire becomes obsolete. So stop trying to make that work.
Yep. You can't halt a DevOps change because someone's got to answer a questionnaire. And ultimately, even if you did want to do it, the DevOps team would just start doing the changes without raising changes. Most likely, in organizations I talk to, right? You just end up, you're better off seeing the changes and monitoring success or fail.
So from a controls perspective, we'll say we are still performing a risk assessment, but we are not doing it via this method. We're going to switch that off. We are doing it via this more automated DevOps method.
Exactly. Yeah, and the change approval board now has a new role, right? They're not looking at each individual change. They're looking to make sure policies are enforced and which policies get enforced in which scenarios. So it's basically the same outcome, control over what gets deployed in production, but it's a more automated way of doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have other hands up? Or do we need to move on? Greg, you're chairing this, so you can stay.
We have, Joe,
we have a few more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one more hand up if you want to do that. Robert, you want to come off mute?
You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, very good. Just a quick question. We did implement the DevOps CV module here at our organization, but one of the things we're discussing is, once it creates the change request, and of course the change requests are populated, we're using a standard change request, which typically has two change tasks. As you know, you have an implementation task, you have a validation task. Have you seen implemented where the pipeline can create additional C tasks as needed based on the pipeline? So I might need 3 teams from this pipeline to do validation, as opposed to another pipeline that may only need 1 validation task. We're struggling with how that might be accomplished. If the pipeline should create whatever additional C tasks are required for that change request.
Yeah, so 2 parts of your question. So you're using standard changes, and I think
actually normal changes.
Oh, normal changes. Okay, then that's fine. Yeah, because standard changes,
at least for now,
wouldn't be appropriate in that scenario. Okay, but a normal change, you want to add additional tasks to the change. Yeah. So whenever the change kicks off, whenever the change is created, there is an integration hub flow that runs in the background that basically is going about the business of getting data and adding it to the change and deciding what happens after it's approved, and step by step. I can show you what that looks like. But the idea is that you can add additional steps to that, and we provide some out of the box. Let me show you back in our chain. But you can modify that to add additional tasks if you wanted to,
Okay.
based on criteria, right? So the one we provide out of the box is a very simple one, and we encourage our customers to make it more, appropriate for their process. So if you look at the change approval guide, you'll see these flows here. Even the most advanced one is actually pretty simple. So most customers will start with that, make a copy of it, make a clone of it, and then use that instead of the one we provide, because it's really just a starting point, like a demo almost, right, that you can use. And then here's where you can say, okay, from that original change creation, let's gather up some data, but let's also add some more tasks to the process. And you pick the appropriate place to do it. But if you're familiar with the Integration Hub and the Flow Designer, it's pretty straightforward to add those. Yeah.
From a change point of view as well, to add to what Joe was saying, and everything Joe's shown you is completely correct. The flow that's triggered is triggered by the model that you select.
Mm-hmm.
If you have on a simple, let's take a happy path here, right? You could have three different or two different DevOps change models. One is for a 3-step verification process at the end, and one is a 2-step verification process. And when you set up that pipeline, Joe, if you just, maybe just going into it, you could the pipeline setup, you can pick the model, right? So every time that pipeline fires, it will fire a certain model of change, and that will make sure that a certain flow fires when that pipeline fires, right? So pipeline, model, flow.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way of doing it. Also, in the near future with change, we're looking at some enhancements around templates and around something called the action framework beyond the scope of this call, which allows a bit more flexibility around the creation of tasks and some logic around that. So there's a few things that's to come, right? That's future looking. But for right now, you'd probably have a couple of different models that have different C-task type dependencies on them that would fire according to workflow.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, you can put decisions in the workflow if you want as well. But it seems neater if it's to handle it with the model.
And by doing this, you could create the change request at any particular point within the pipeline.
Yeah.
You could always do that. I mean, we recommend creating it right before the production deployment, because most pipelines don't make it to productions, and you only need a change record if you do go to production. So you want to put that change request right before the production deployment.
Understood. We have teams, however, that create change requests first in order to use the change request number and the C-task number as tracking for their code branches. So consequently, they're sort of doing it maybe backwards. They want the change first, and then they'll populate it later, whereas other teams will wait and do it as you suggest. And I would say best practice is to wait until after, or at least to the point of UAT, where you know what you're going to put into production to get that change moving. But, teams do things different, as you pointed out earlier. So we're dealing with a couple of different scenarios here on when things should be done and how many things should be created. So, yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
I think, Joe, I'm not sure if you had more demo you wanted to show, or I think that's
There was one more thing I wanted to show, and that's basically, as an operator, an alert comes in, and from that alert, ServiceNow is very good at saying, okay, this is the configuration item that's impacted by the alert. Maybe you're running Datadog or something that's sending events to ServiceNow, and you get an alert, and it's saying, okay, this is what's impacted. We can show you what changes took place, right? And these small incremental changes now, you see a whole bunch of them here. Look at the most recent one. It'll give me the actual, it'll help me determine root cause very quickly, right? Because I can see, okay, this happened right before the incident. This is most likely what caused it. I could drill into the actual commit record in that change record, right? Because we're capturing that from the Git repository. I can go in there and see what file was touched, and then if I go into that record, it will actually show me the change to the line of code, right? Even the code snippet that was modified. So I could, a developer can then use this information to go in and troubleshoot the problem and very quickly resolve it. And that's the game here, right? Is to try and get these alerts resolved quickly, and to be able to just have a stable environment and improve service availability. So that's the last thing. And if there are no more questions, Greg, I'll hand it back to you to wrap up.
We had one more good question that came in there, which was about, if you look in the questions, there's a question about digital product release and DevOps change velocity integration. So it's from...
That's an excellent question. Let me see if I can do that in a minute. I can show you that. Yeah,
Cool.
It's an excellent question because digital product release is a brand new solution from ServiceNow for actually, we talked a lot about the policy in the change request. Well, digital product release is focused on release readiness, even before you deploy to production, just the process of, building code and making sure things get done correctly and is the code ready for release, right? And what we do as part of that, and I'll show you an example of release, is we execute that release with the assumption that, it might not all be deployed all at once. So you might have to have multiple change records. So here's a release that's, we're going through all the tasks and so on. And you might have change records here. This one doesn't have, let me find another one, that are part of that release. So we relate those change records to the release itself. And it could be for a few different reasons, right?
I don't like garlic and...
I'm sorry? So you might have, you might deploy multiple builds as part of a release, and those change records will show up, but you might also deploy to multiple environments as part of a release. So you might have multiple change records there. In this case, we're relating all the changes to the release, but still making sure that the release is ready to deploy. So that's just a taste, right? That's basically the relationship. If you're familiar with DPR, that's the relationship.
Joe, we have one more that came through in the chat from Bill. So where/when do you identify CIs for the change record?
So that's done as part of the onboarding of an application. When you create that record, that you decide where you want to open the change, right? Which step of the pipeline you want to open the change. You say what type of change you want to open. You could also say what configuration item are we using to, are we attaching that change to? Yeah, so here's the record I'm referring to. This decides when we open the change. There's my configuration item. Usually it's like an application service, or maybe like an environment, of an application service and so on. So that's where we open the change. That's where we decide. And that's done basically at the pipeline level. So usually you have multiple pipelines. It might be impacting multiple CIs, and that's why you could decide which CI is impacted by that pipeline.
Okay. I think that's everything. We have a couple more being covered in the chat. Anything else? If anyone has any more questions, please raise your hand. Okay. If not, I think we can wrap there. Thank you everyone for joining. Oh, Bill. Do you want to come up mute and ask Bill?
Yes, I think I'm up. Am I audible?
Yep.
Another question is, I'm the one who asked about these CIs and the date and time. Okay, so people are doing work because you want them to flow freely, yet in the same vein, you want to make sure the enterprise knows when you're doing work, and auditors want to know, hey, when do you enter production, blah, blah, blah. I don't see you capturing that anywhere other than when it actually happens. That's only if you've got that end of it automated too, the release end of it, right?
If you're opening a change record, basically the implementation state of the change record is when we allow the pipeline to deploy. And after it finishes deploying, that's the timestamp you're looking for, right? When did it go into production? That's all captured in the change record. The change record is basically marrying, an artifact or a group of artifacts to a configuration item, saying we're deploying these artifacts to this configuration item. Oh, and by the way, we've done all this validation as part of this process, just to make everybody happy. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Is it
Yes,
what's,
and you're saying that date and time that's captured over there on the Azure DevOps end of the puzzle will feed back to the change record and update that information there? Is that what happens?
it's in the change record as well. So when the pipeline is successful, we record that this is the interaction between the pipeline and the change record. So you see all the details make it back to the change record, pending decision, it gets approved. The change record will go from an implement state once it's deployed to whatever the next state is in your change model, usually the review state or the close state, and that will be logged in the change record itself. Let me see if I have an example of that. But yeah, that's exactly how it should work. So that should serve as the record as to when this particular group of artifacts were deployed to this configuration item. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm going to ask another question, and maybe it's one of those dumb questions is, okay, so it's really the actions of moving the card on the board that tells you when something gets into the, is being reviewed in production and then being closed. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Yeah,
Okay,
because
so the date of when it gets closed and when you're saying is being used to say, hey, this is moved into production, it's reliant on the people that are moving those cards that kind of determine that time and date, right?
well, if you're automating it, then it's basically the execution of that pipeline.
Yes, I
And the
got
start
you.
and end time.
We're not that automated to
Yeah.
that respect. But I've
But
automated
but even
change.
if you're not automated, somebody should close out the change record manually then, right?
Well, I like to me, it's like when they move the card on the board to closed, that means this thing is done. What I'm having a problem with is people sometimes, that's just administrative work that happens on the back end. We're not automated to the point where when the release gets done, that kind of moves on that board. You have to move that on your board yourself. So I'm kind of getting bit by the people that don't close their features at the right time.
Yeah, so even if you don't have full change automation where, when the production deployment happens, we close out the change record. So you can still use the event from the pipeline to close the change record. So that might be kind of an interim type of automation you could implement before you implement full change automation.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so actually, but just wanted to verify. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just another benefit of having the integration in place. You get all these events of things happening. They're going to show up in your, in the tables, and you can make things happen based on those events. Even if you don't use this specific use case, there's a lot to be gained by just integrating the DevOps tools with ServiceNow and getting all the pipeline execution steps, for example, getting all the commits, getting all the work items. That triggered, lots of other customers to do other use cases based on those events that they're getting.
No doubt. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Donna, do you want to go? Donna, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Donna's not on mute, but I don't hear her.
And maybe Donna will come back to you. Marcus, is your hand back up?
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yep.
No. Might be a silly question, but never mind. A lot of our teams, they use DevOps tooling, such as ADO, but they don't work in a DevOps fashion, by which I mean releasing little and often. They're still tied to doing 2-week release cycles and stuff, so you're losing half the benefit of what this stuff does. But one team that does work in a DevOps way in releasing little and often is my team, as in ServiceNow. Changing ServiceNow, developing ServiceNow, the new functionality, this, that, and the other. so we use the Agile module in ServiceNow, the storyboards and all that kind of stuff. Does any of this stuff you've been showing us lend itself to developing ServiceNow in that way, using storyboards and so on?
Yeah, if you're using SPM, Agile, right? Those work items show up in our DevOps data model, just like if you're using ADO or Jira. So it's the same integration. We'll pick those work items up from the DevOps data model. You'll see the links back to those stories. So again, when you have those change records that get automatically open, they'll link back to those stories to show exactly which stories are being resolved.
The key difference, though, is that the thing that ties it all together is the pipeline. So the thing that, the pipeline runs and it pulls in all this information around stories and testing, because it's the pipeline run that we're tracking, the pipeline execution. And the ServiceNow deployments, in almost every case, don't have a pipeline. So whereas Joe was saying we have the ability to track these and add them to a change, we can't do quite what we're showing here, because you'd have to manually add them, because that just isn't, unless you have some way of knowing what's added, right? Unless you can, maybe we can discuss it. The pipeline is the thing for DevOps that does that. There are other ways. And we can use the story information, but we just don't have a pipeline for the ServiceNow deployments generally. Some people do, but generally.
Yeah, but the data's there, right? And this goes back
the
to
data's there.
Change traceability use case. If you're going to create a new change, you can use data from the DevOps model, right?
But I think it's a really key thing, though, to reiterate maybe, though, is that the kind of key to all this working, all the things we've shown here, there is a huge suite of data that we can bring in through the integrations, and it gives you visibility of what's happening in those tools, right, in all the developer tools you've got. But in order to automate that change creation and use what Joe's showing as DevOps change velocity, that there needs to be a pipeline there, right? That's the key component that needs to be there to make it all kind of tie together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't necessarily need a pipeline, but you do need to have it tied together, and you do need to be able to say, okay, this is a DevOps change, right? And then once you do that, you bring it up again. Once you do that, you can where is that change? We can then add DevOps data to it. So even if you're not automatically creating the change, I could, if I know I'm deploying something that was built through, I guess you do need pipelines, right? Because if you're building your application with pipelines, you're going to have like build numbers, and you'll be able to pick a certain application and say, hey, we're deploying this application from this pipeline. Or you could do it by artifact version. As long as the data is in the platform, we're able to then grab.
There's no reason why that has to be a DevOps change at that point, because you're tying the data together manually. You could be doing other models of change. You can be doing other types of change. The DevOps integrations bring that data in for a waterfall team that's using ADO, or if their stories are described in Jira, it can bring the data through, and you can manually attach it. So it's a question beyond the kind of scope of today's call, though.
Yeah. It's another stop on the adoption journey, right? To be able to manually create change using the data that we're automatically bringing in from the tools. Yeah. Before you get to automated change, you can do this first.
Okay, and then Donna, do you want to give you one more chance here? Okay. So, Joe, I'm going to share again.
There's one more question that's come up in the chat that I can't answer that maybe Joe will be able to answer.
Okay.
Not one I've ever come across before. So, Christy, do you want to come off mute and just ask your question?
Let me enable that.
I can ask it if you want.
Here, I just allowed her to talk.
You allowed it, cool. Hi there, Christy. Okay, so the question was, I think it was linking Epic content rather than story content to changes.
Correct. I just happened to, it popped into my head as we were speaking. We're using Epic Content Manager to move our changes through all these different landscapes on their side. So we don't use our ServiceNow change management process. That's outside of the scope. And I was just wondering if this is a use case or no, not at all.
I'm not familiar with Epic and
Okay.
the change management process there. I mean, this is really tightly integrated with ServiceNow change management, and I don't really see a way to.
Oh, I want them to use ServiceNow change management, but they don't want to
Yeah.
have to rekey in, just like as your developers
Oh,
are
I see. So to
challenged,
get
they
the
have to
data,
re-enter manual changes. And so we already put it here. Now I got to retype it in a different module, and it's not really adding much value.
yeah, if
I
we
was
can
just
get,
looking for a solution.
yeah, if we can get that data into the tables we use, and I'm not familiar enough with Epic to know if it has things like webhooks and so on, but that's generally the
Okay.
way we work. So when things happen in these DevOps tools, they generate webhooks. ServiceNow processes the webhooks, right? So and creates the records that we need. Basically, any user integration you create would require you to write the stuff that processes the webhook from that particular tool.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Christy, can I jump in here? Is this Epic the healthcare product that you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Yeah. It may be worthwhile to do a follow-up because deeply understanding how are you using it. We've seen good traction from use case overlap with our digital product release and Epic. That may be the answer here. But without understanding further, yeah, maybe that's what we do, Christy. Reach out to us and we go deep dive with your use case.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, I was
before
just gonna say if it's just to get started with this, it's very simple. You can go into the store and install the DevOps change module on your instance, in a subprod instance. Then you can go through the process of connecting your tools and bringing in the data from those tools. And basically, there's a guided tour that take you through it step by step to get your tools connected and so on. But it's fairly easy to get started, at least on the first couple of stops on the adoption journey, which was, bring the data in and start creating change records using that data.